Hello, welcome to History Chats. I'm just going to make sure. I decided not to do the full introduction because I think this will be fine. Yeah, it's working great. Hey, so this is going to be a little different than what I had planned to do today. For those of you are maybe curious about the Charleston, which is what I had scheduled myself to do. It's a great story. It's going to be coming at some point. But I unfortunately scheduled one of the more ambitious videos that I wanted to, in stories I wanted to tell in a while. The week after our major exhibit was finished, which is up now, it's about the 1920s, if you haven't gotten a chance to come out and see it, which most of you probably haven't, you should come out and see that. And I'm also doing a program this Saturday for our History Speaks, which is about Neal Brown. And I thought, I don't have time to edit all of the stuff. We'll get to the Charleston at some point in the near future. But for now, I thought I'd give you a little taste of some Neal Brown stuff, specifically some things that they probably won't make their way into the main program this weekend. So don't worry, like if you're watching this well after the fact, and not before the 29th here, this should still be interesting on its own. So I figured I'd give a little smattering of stories here from the Nebro Can, which is a shortening of what I'm calling the Neal Brown canon. Neal Brown wrote a lot of books, a lot of, articles, a lot of newspaper sort of things, a lot of letters. But in particular, he liked to, there's a lot of stuff that he contributed, stuff that was written for conventions, speeches that he's given, or for friends, or literary criticism, or, there's a lot of different stuff. And I wanted to kind of explore that. Actually, if I pull it up here, here's a Word document, which there's a lot of them. There's over 30. And this is not including, articles that he wrote for like newspapers that he contributed, like letters to the editor, or any of the correspondence that he's done over the years. There's a lot of stuff. And I don't know, there's probably more that we could include in here, but this is what we had, what I could find. I've spent the last year or so trying to read everything by Neal Brown. It's become kind of this interesting thing I've been trying to accomplish of understanding who he is. And I've decided that the Neal Brown canon, the stuff that tells us who the guy is. I guess very briefly, if you're not familiar with who Neal Brown is, he's probably best known for being the lawyer of the Wausau group, the group of lumber barons who transform Marathon County and the region into, the paper, the manufacturing, the insurance, the stuff that has created this diversified economy for the Wausau area and, allowed this area to continue to thrive. Neal Brown is the attorney who makes all that possible. He's also a politician. He's elected to the legislature. He's a very prominent Democrat. He is an outdoorsman. He's one of the best fishermen in the country. He is a valued hunting partner to go out hunting with because he'd show you the ropes. The Neal Brown canon actually reflects a lot of this. There's some things that are philosophical, right? He contributed literary criticism and ideas about philosophy, which were fairly interesting. There's instructional, there is political. Certainly, he wrote quite a few political tracts in his time. And then also there's sort of like manuscripts and, some things that weren't necessarily published as far as I can tell, but we have in our collection, which I'm including. And like I said, I tried my best to try to read through all of these. I wasn't sure what to do with them. Ultimately became History Speaks, which is what I'm going to do this Saturday. But also, there's still possibilities. A lot of that didn't make it. It's not going to make it into the program, right? I actually tried for a while. I recorded myself. After reading a bit, I would record myself and sit down and kind of like, oh, here's what I thought about this. Here's what this was. I was thinking maybe like a book club or something. I wanted to kind of get a smattering of all the things. And watching this stuff back for this, it's a lot. It's hours of me just talking to myself, and I probably won't use this footage, but you never know. You never know what might come up. So it's also weird seeing yourself talking in a camera like this this many times, so I'm going to move on. So let's get to 5 interesting stories about Neal Brown, the Sage of Wausau. So notably, he most of the stuff that he published looks kind of like this. I know not a great camera, but they're just sort of pamphlets that were published, pretty nicely. But he really only wrote one book, which is this book here. It's a nice hardcover. It's called Critical Confessions. Is published in 1899, and it consists of a variety of different short critical analyses or little stories, little insights of various things. Some of them are sort of general, but most of them are about specific topics. And actually, a lot of these are republished, having appeared first in the Philosopher Press chapbook newsletter, and then they were just compiled into this book. So he talks. It's interesting to kind of look at some of this. So he focuses on a variety of different individuals and their writings. Andrew Lang is a Scottish novelist and like folklorist. He published a lot of like the folklore stories. Henri de Balzac is a French, obviously, a French playwright and a novelist of himself. William Makepeace Thackeray, another British writer of note. John Smith, and this is the guy associated with Pocahontas, right? But he was a real guy, not just a Disney cartoon, and an explorer, a mercenary, a statesman, one of the early settlers of the United States. So there's a lot of this stuff, right? And these are all like labeled directly about them, and they're mostly like Neal Brown doesn't write about people or stories that he does not think is worth writing about. Like if he just doesn't he's not like criticizing for the sake of they're bad, piling on them. Like if they're bad, he's not going to talk about them. These are all people that he admires, and maybe he has some nitpicks here and there, or some things that he wants to say, but that's kind of the basic idea. There's also some other ones that are a little less clear. They're not labeled, but for example, there's one called A Deferred Criticism, which talks at length about some poetry, and he doesn't say who it's about. He doesn't say, here's the person I'm criticizing. But he also quotes pretty extensively from her poetry. So it didn't take long for people to piece that he's talking about the Wisconsin poet Ella Wheeler Wilcox, who wrote a series of passion poems, which is the things, which were kind of controversial at the time. Neal Brown doesn't like the passion, apparently. So, a variety of different things here. But I think it's also worth noting that he's not criticizing like, she's bad. It's just like, you could do more. Like, you don't need to do this. Or at least that's just his perspective. Yeah. So when it came out in 1899, 98, 99, it was 99, I think is when it was published. There's just to give you an idea of how it was received. On the left here, we have Wisconsin State Journal, and then a little thing from the Dunn County News. These are two that I found. The Dunn County News is interesting because it's talking about, hey, Neal Brown, the Wausau attorney, recently published a book. Talking about all these people. We have not read the book, but if Neal Brown can write half as well as he could debate in the days of old Lang Syne, when we heard him in the country schoolhouse, we will wager that his confessions are racy, which is interesting to write a review not having read the material, but okay. The Wisconsin State Journal is much better and really interesting. I'm not going to read all of it, but the introduction is interesting. So he apparently has been long regarded as by the discriminating as one of the dozen most interesting men in Wisconsin. So he has written the book. He is a big, smooth-faced, fine-lined lawyer of Wausau who has sat in the state senate and gives one an impression of almost any kind of possibilities. You wonder he is not a great deal bigger fellow than he is, and you think he may yet be. So he doesn't embody from his writing. He was a big guy, physically. He has a fondness for literature on the side. He sprung from the precise puritanic stock, and as often the reaction has made him nervous, critical, and sometimes bitter, yada, yada, yada. And then they end it by saying, and unfortunately the newspaper got cut off because it was at an angle, but basically he says, more to the point, basically it says critical confessions. He's not actually confessing anything. This is sort of a play on words from other existing writers. More to the point, no one can think of Neal Brown as confessing anything, but every Wisconsin man should read the book and know that we have geniuses near home. So I think generally it was well received, particularly because not a lot of other people were doing this in Wisconsin. So yeah, it's pretty cool. Speaking of geniuses and great men, one of the, if Critical Confessions is one of the first books that Neal, or works that Neal puts out, I believe this might be the last. This is a manuscript that we have in our collection called Some Great Men of the Time. I don't know what it was written for. We'll get into the context in a second, but he introduces this by saying, we who are familiar with the pictured and graven features, their pictured and graven features, watch them passed in review. A phantom procession. Statesmen, soldiers, journalists, historians, poets, philosophers, clergymen, novels, writers of essays, sketches. Our nation has produced a great many men before and since this period of our history. And he's talking about like his youth in like the mid-1800s. Produced a great number of these, but we may safely say that at no point were there so many. Men become great through intellect and love. Love meaning regard for their country and their fellow men as a desire to serve. For if we love, we serve. So then he goes on and he spends the first couple of pages talking about Abraham Lincoln, naturally. Neal Brown was born and raised in a very pro-Lincoln family. Started as a Republican for his first few years here in Wausau before he switches over some issues that we won't get into here. But he's a big fan. He talks about the Civil War extensively. It's certainly a very trying time. So Abraham Lincoln, here's why he's a great guy. Some of the people in his cabinet are great too. Not all of them, but some of them. Some of the generals are great, the soldiers. Grant, Sherman, gets the thumbs up there. He even has some positive things to say about the Confederates, right? The cause might not be great, and it wasn't, but, General Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson were great men of their own sentiment in his ideas. Again, the idea of being intellectual and having a love that brings them to serve. Then he goes on to talk about some other things. Like I said here at the beginning, he outlines his plan to talk about statesmen, soldiers, journalists, historians, poets, philosophers, clergymen, novelists, and writers of essays and sketches. And eventually he branches out. So here you can see that the stationery on this changes. So the heading, by page 6, it's the Wausau Law and Land Association, which is one of the companies, the practices that Neal has through most of his life. And then by the last 2 pages, it actually is on the stationery for Employers Mutual, which is Wausau Insurance. And based off of the people in the the officers here, I think I managed to narrow this down to 1915, 1916. Neal dies in 1917, so this is fairly late. I don't know if he typed this up or what have you, but yeah. So he talks a little bit about some of these people. He thinks that Horace Greeley is the greatest journalist, although interestingly he talks about a couple others that are in the mix, including someone that he says Thurlow Weed from Albany, and Thurlow Weed is his father. It's Thurlow Weed Brown, but he just kind of tosses that in there. He's one of the great journalists, the great men of the time, of course, and arguably he was. Then he gets into a little bit of literature. I'm not going to go through all of it, but you can see the bit here where he says New England group are great. William Cullen Bryant, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Hawthorne, Longfellow, Whittier, classics there. And he just kind of ends it. He talks about a little bit lesser poets, but he never gets into the clergymen or the writers of sketches. And he just kind of has 2 last things that are written here. I don't know if this is his handwriting or not, but Bancroft and Motley, who are both historians. And I guess this was just, I don't know. I don't know if he finished it or not, but kind of an interesting insight into who he thought were great men. The Phantom Club is an interesting thing. So Neal Brown is brought into this group of Wisconsin, mostly Wisconsin folks. This is before his time. This is earlier on. I don't know if we have a real picture. Kind of hard to say for sure, but by the 19-teens, he gets brought into this group. It's a group of prominent men from Wisconsin, again, primarily statesmen, lawyers, jurists, political people. They all get together and they, hang out and talk, and particularly they bring ideas. So they'll bring like an essay that they've written that they'll read to the group, and then they'll talk about it. And Neal Brown contributes at least two. One about getting old, which is an interesting one to read. I'm not going to talk about that one, but the one I want to talk about is Lost Books, which is interesting. He reads this before the Phantom Club get together in 1915. And the full thing is fascinating in itself. Basically, he's talking about how notable books that stick out in his mind that were lost or given out and never returned. He talks about his own library and the things that he has there. Let me pull this up here. So one of the bits, I just thought one thing to highlight here that's interesting is he says, from my boyhood, I have made it a point to read everything that I could find in type, with certain exceptions that I shall presently advert to. I confess that in the realm of my appetite, dime novels, bestsellers, and the more ponderous tomes of pundit and sage have been welcome, although not equally welcome. And then later on, he says over here, I am often made the subject of unseemly satire because I read so much trash. But I like trash better than I do the three-deckers called novels written by ponderous platinetarians. Which is interesting. It's an interesting perspective, right? Because I think this is someone that he would not have said in the 1890s, right? This is 20 years later. He's older, and at this point, he's not so pretentious, and I read some trash, and I think there's something kind of relatable about that. Sometimes you don't need to read stuff that's gonna be for your betterment. Sometimes you just want to get lost in a story, and also it's good to know what's going on in that realm too. If you want to be aware of the cultural changes in that time. So Lost Books, interesting there. This is cheating a little bit. I said I wasn't going to use any in correspondence, but I did sneak one into the canon. So this book, which was published by Marvin Rosenberry in 1941, two different colors, two different editions, I guess. I guess the one I scanned here was green. Anyway, it's not important. Published in the 40s, but talking about the Deerfoot Lodge hunting cabin that a number of the Wausau folks went up and started around 1910. They had been going up before that point, but in 1910 they invested in this hunting lodge, which I believe was on Lake Laura. And in 1910, because they suddenly had a bigger venue to bring people up, they could bring more people with them. And so Neal Brown takes it upon himself to write a letter to all of the members. And Rosenberry included it here in the index, or the appendix. And basically what he's saying is, here is all the stuff that you're going to need to know and going to need to bring, right? Here's advice about what you should bring. Hey, if you get lost, don't just keep going. Plan on coming home by dusk because, we don't want to have to go look for you. But if you get lost, stay put. Bring extra rounds so that you can signal by shooting your gun in this pattern and we'll come find you. A lot of that sort of stuff. Just as an example, I thought I'd read one paragraph of his advice here, which is about coats. I might add that your hunting coat should be full of pockets. In fact, it should be all pockets, big breast pockets inside and a big pocket all the way around the bottom, big enough to put a small deer in. Don't be satisfied with the small dinky pockets that are usually put in mackinaws and hunting coats. If you are bound to wear a many-colored coat or hat, don't force yourself in the most conspicuous place in the landscape and expect that a deer is going to walk over you. If you are bound to wear the colors of the rainbow, make yourself as modest and inconspicuous as possible. Don't expect that a deer is going to come within 4 miles of that flaunting signal if he sees it. You ought to be able in some other way to keep your companions from shooting you up. Which is interesting. Obviously, at this point, they don't know that deer can't see blaze orange and red, and they don't have the bright colors. Or maybe he didn't know. I don't know. But he definitely, I will say at a later date, within like a year or two, apparently there was an incident that Rosenberry recounts where a bunch of hunters were going out, and Neal, who had this, molted sort of flannel jacket that he loved to go hunting in, was brown. He comes out of out of the brush, and they have their guns pointed at him, and like they think he's a deer. And after that, maybe he kind of goes, "Oh, okay, yeah, maybe I shouldn't be wearing this." But again, not all of Neal Brown's advice holds up. This one does not. Make sure that you wear blaze orange if you're going hunting, or something like that. Finally, I wanted to talk about Critical Confessions. It gets a second edition in 1904. This is that. It covers a little less interesting, but in particular, they add one big. Oh, sorry, 1902. It's 1902. Let me see if I can fix that real quick. Yeah. No, it's 1902. Sorry. I guess I'm not gonna fiddle with it right now. Anyway, 1902. The first runs its course. He also writes another major essay as part of a speech called John Marshall in His Times. So it's about the Supreme Court judge, jurist, lawyer John Marshall. And so it's basically the same except for that, but there's one more edition that I thought was really interesting. So in the first edition, he had talked about Andrew Lang, right? He's that Scottish folklorist and writer. There he is. Well, apparently, Neal Brown was made aware that Lang had actually read his book. And so in the very end, actually there's two sort of bits that he includes right at the end of it. Among other comments made since the publication of the first edition of this book, there are portions of 2 letters which may be of interest to the reader. And I wanted to speak specifically about, one is, giving more information, yada, yada. At the bottom here, it's on the left side, it says, Mr. Andrew Lang says, and I don't think he's writing to Neal Brown. I think this is just correspondence that he was made aware of. And specifically, he doesn't comment, or at least Neal doesn't include comments about his own writing about, Andrew Lang. But he does talk about the John Smith, right? Captain Smith. And he kind of is like, yeah, I've read that sort of criticism, the take that Neal Brown has about John Smith. It's Americans, have criticisms, and I'm not, entirely convinced. But he says of the writing, however, he is amusing, whether he is inventive or not. I've never read the story of Tennyson and the 300 pounds before, but even if it is true, it was only his fun and chaff, uttered in the presence of some dull ass who repeated without understanding it. And I don't really know what he's saying here, but it doesn't seem terribly, it's not a positive review of Neal Brown. I think, or the story, the inclusion. He makes it interesting, but like it's not an interesting story. I don't know. It's just a weird inclusion, right? I think if I were writing a book and doing a second edition, and one of the people that I valued enough to like write about gave me criticism, I don't know that I would put it in there. But Neal does. And I think that there's something interesting about that too, right? There's a lot, and I should clarify, there's a lot here. A lot of the writings I don't really know what to do with. There is larger concepts of that he throws out there that I'm still kind of grappling with, and I don't know how to spin that out. I probably won't talk about them at the History Speaks that I'll be doing the lecture. Maybe at some point we'll return to Neal Brown and do a book club or something. I don't know. Maybe get some experts to kind of talk about it. Maybe I'll have to settle on that. But there's things about like the university system or expansionism. Is Neal Brown an imperialist? Some people say absolutely, and some people say no, he's an anti-imperialist. His writing is really interesting, and I think that is something that has drawn me to Neal Brown, right? Yeah. Again, I'll just throw the plug. If you're watching this live or within a day or two of it coming out, I'm doing a talk this Saturday about Neal Brown and his larger experience, the Sage of Wausau, and all the stuff he does. If you missed this or you can't make it, that's okay. I'm hoping to record it, and at some point I'll edit it and get it out there and let you know about it, if that's something that you'd be interested in watching. But I guess I just wanted to say that, like, Neal Brown is very interesting because of his contemporaries. We don't really have a lot of like writing, or personal anecdotes, or things like that for some of the people that he was in his time, right? Neal Brown is very outspoken. He's got thoughts about literature and politics and hunting and fishing and all of these things, and it makes for a really interesting person, not only as a lens to understand who the guy is, but especially to understand all of these branching paths about what's going on at the time, and I think that that's pretty cool. So. Yeah, that's the program. Like I said, at some point I will finish the Charleston for the 1920s. It was another interesting story there too, but just got a little too busy, and was unable to get that done. But at some point I will finish that, and we'll be back with other history chats like that. We are going to be taking some time off, so starting next week in July, Gary and I are going to be taking a bit of sabbatical here, so there won't be weekly programs. However, we'll be back at some point, and there'll be some version of this. This has been a great opportunity, and if you've been watching, I just want to take the opportunity to once again say thank you. Whether you've watched I mean, if you're still watching to this point, that probably means you've watched a few of these over the years, and it has been years. So thank you. It means a lot, and we're looking forward to maybe figuring out how to make history chats or this sort of programming more interesting and maybe less time consuming for the amount of stuff. I don't know. We'll see. But in the meantime, enjoy the summer, and we'll be back at some point with more history chats. And in the meantime, have a wonderful day. And again, if you're watching this live, come to the program this Saturday. It should be good. Anyway, thanks for watching.